Right. Hello, everyone. We are now beginning the program. If you are here now, right on time at 10 o'clock, thank you. You'll catch the whole program. If you come in a bit later, you will not hear this message, but we are streaming live on YouTube. So you'll always be able to rewind if you're catching us live or watch the whole program. If you're catching us afterward, I am Kay. I'm a member of the Communist Party USA, and here we have with us Dr. Rob Davies from the South African Communist Party, who we are so grateful to have today. And today we're going to be talking about the rise of the tech oligarchs. For any of you who've been following what's been going on with the US government, uh, we've seen a lot of characters who are super rich, among the richest people in the world, and quite possibly in history, uh, taking control of government, not as elected officials, not as any sort of democratic position, but as people who have stolen from millions in this country and billions worldwide, the worth of their work. And so, a curious thing about them is that there are several who have come from South Africa uh, to uh, grow their power here in the United States, coming into the tech industry, spreading their ideological and financial influence. And so we thought it would be a good idea to hear from our South African comrades about what exactly is going on there, and what the connections are between, say, the apartheid struggle in South Africa and what we're seeing here in the US, what we're threatened with. So before I hand it to our comrade Rob, I will read a short introduction. Uh, Rob Davies is a member of the Central Committee and Politburo of the South African Communist Party. He became an anti-apartheid activist in the 1960s and a member of organizations of South Africa's liberation movement after being forced into exile in the 1970s. Most of his exile was spent in Mozambique, where he worked as a senior researcher at the Center of African Studies at Eduardo Mondlane University. He became an ANC MP in the first Democratic Parliament in 1994 and served continuously until he retired in 2019. Between 2009 and 2019, he served as South African Minister of Trade and Industry. After 2019, he has been an honorary professor at the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance at the University of Cape Town and a member of the Advisory Council on Industrial Development and Trade established by the Secretary Development of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So I'll hand it to you, Comrade Rob. Thank you for being with us. You're muted.
Well, thanks very much, Comrade K. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity. Can someone put up the slides as I'm just beginning? I wanted to say that in one of the conversations I had, I don't know whether it was with Comrade Joe or Comrade Dante, but I did say it was a bit of an irony that we are talking about figures like Trump and Musk in what is on your side um, African or Black History Month. So I think that the connection obviously is because some of these characters are greatly influenced by the most reactionary and backward pro-apartheid forces in South Africa. And I think it's that kind of connection that I want to draw at some point. But also, I think the bigger picture that we're facing is that there's a rapid process of change that's taking place. I think in the whole way in which U.S. imperialism is operating, and also very in the state in the U.S., which I think is not going to be limited to the state in the U.S., but I think is probably going to emerge as a model that's going to be thrust on the rest of us. So I think that it's a great opportunity to exchange a few views. So can we move on to the next slide, please? So I think the obvious point, and I'm sure your comrades know beef better than us, but this administration has been in office for just about a month. but it's been acting very, very quickly and in ways that suggest it's pursuing a radical new direction, as I said earlier, both for US imperialism and the structuring of the US state. And that standing behind Trump is a South African born tech oligarch, Elon Musk. And, numerous people have commented on the fact that at the inauguration, in this sort of seats that are normally reserved for high government officials, members of cabinet, and whatever. You had all of the tech oligarchs, leading tech oligarchs in the US standing there, which was a symbolic way of saying that the tech oligarchy has become the predominant and most important force within US capitalism, along with the financial capitalists of Wall Street, and also, I think, the resurgence of fossil fuel, particularly big oil capital. And of course, not only is Elon Musk in playing that role, but he's also heading up the this thing called the Department of Government Efficiency, which whose role was identified in this thing called Project 2025, and looks set to radically restructure the U.S. state apparatus. Now, for us as South African Marxists, the significance of Musk is not so much the fact that he was born in South Africa and grew up in South Africa, because I think a lot of his political formation took place as he became a tech oligarch, and that took place in the United States, and then moved from being if you like, a businessman to also becoming a politician. I think that much of that happened in the U.S. and, of course, was shaped by the political economy of the U.S. within which he acted. But he does have a father that still lives in South Africa. In fact, not far from where I am, which is on the west coast, just north of Cape Town. His father is sometimes on the radio. His father had a past as he stood for the white liberal progressive federal party. I don't know for exactly what position. He never got elected during the apartheid days. Their policy was at that stage what was called a qualified franchise. They believed that all whites should have the vote, but black people who met educational and income qualifications should also get the vote. That was the extent of the liberalism that they had at the time. When he's interviewed, and he's been interviewed quite a bit on the local media in South Africa, he says that Musk comes to South Africa and they go on holidays in the bushveld areas and things like that. He also says he agrees with much of what Musk is saying, and he's become, I think, a bit of a megaphone for the views that Elon Musk is propagating in the US, but also I think what's very, very important is that those groups, both Trump, or those individuals, both Trump and Musk and various others, have got the ear of the most reactionary forces in South Africa. There's a group called AfriForum, and they have grown out of a group which was originally during the apartheid period, was the right-wing opposition to the P.W. Botha administration. So they were to the right of the apartheid government in the old parliament, and they've come in. They now still have seats in parliament. They call the Freedom Front, or Vryheidsfront in Afrikaans, and they are this wing called AfriForum. They've been using lawfare to challenge a whole lot of transformative laws and regulations inside the courts of South Africa. But now they've also been embarking on campaigns to try to mobilize international support. And they've got the ear of the Heritage Foundation and various other right-wing think tanks in the US. And through that, they've acquired a certain amount of influence. And I'm going to talk about some of that because I want to start off by talking about what Trump has already said about South Africa, what they've already threatening to do and are doing in relation to South Africa. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to look at what we think are some of the longer term implications of what's going on with the Trump Musk administration, both in terms of I think there are changes afoot in the way in which US imperialism is going to operate, and definitely changes afoot in the way the US state will be structured, but that are going to have significance not just for the US state, but I think for the pressures is going to be for many of the rest of us to emulate the direction of travel that project is embarking on. So the next slide, please. So I want to say that this fast-moving thing that Trump has been doing included measures directed against South Africa. So on February the 7th, he issued an executive order. He talked about the horrible things that were going on in South Africa, and these horrible things merited a series of measures, which I'll discuss in a few moments. He cited three things. And I just want to go through them because I think we would like to brief our comrades in the US about that and actually make call for whatever support you can give in campaigning against them. But the first thing he cited was something which was recently signed into law and which these groups like AfriForum and others have been challenging and trying to mobilize international support against. It's something called the Expropriation Act. Now, they're trying to present this as though this was a precursor to a major and radical land reform program in South Africa. Now, from the point of view of the SACP, we wish it were, but it's not. It's more like what the US has. It's called, I think in the US, called eminent domain. It is a series of procedures where, for public purposes, government needs to expropriate land against the wishes maybe of the owner to construct roads, railways, telecommunications infrastructure, whatever it is. And also in the case of South Africa, to allow some land reform to take place within parameters of the Constitution, which was already a compromise in 1996. So our Constitution says that there is a right to property, but it doesn't say that there can't be land reform, and it doesn't say that there can't be anybody who has acquired land through apartheid privilege should only be able to lose that land if they are getting compensated at the full market value. So there's the Constitution allows for some deviation from that. There's some very complicated language about you have to take account of how the land was acquired, whether there's been any improvements, whether it's been used productively, and all of that. And this expropriation law basically gives effect to that. And it tries to define more clearly the processes and procedures under which that could take place. And it does include a section under which saying under what circumstances could there be no compensation, nil compensation. And this is very, very limited. Basically, if you are sitting on a piece of land, you've already recouped your capital, you're now trying to speculate, and you haven't improved it, and it's not been used productively. And then, if the state decides to do that, and there's a limited number of officials within the state who have the right to do that, if that does happen, there's all sorts of procedures and processes of appeal. So it's really not what they present it as, but it has been presented as a quote unquote Zimbabwe style land grab that's about to happen in South Africa, and that white people, particularly white people who speak the Afrikaans language, they are actually a minority of the people in South Africa who speak the Afrikaans language. Only 40% of the people who speak the Afrikaans language are white, but it's been presented as such. That's one of the reasons that Trump cited. The second one he cited was South Africa's role in the International Court of Justice case on genocide in Palestine conducted by the Israeli regime. I'm sure you've all followed that. We are immensely proud, even those of us who have been quite critical of our government on various other issues. We are immensely proud and immensely supportive of that. I think that highlighted the fact of genocide in Palestine, in the Gaza in particular, but also in the West Bank. It took it into an international forum in a way which I think was very, very important. But it also showed up that in the world order that we are living in, there is no rule of law or multilateralism that prevails over the wishes of the superpower. And I'm going to say in a moment that this is one of the problems. It's not its dominance is not as established as it once was, but obviously the measures that were agreed by the court, which were quite mild, have not been implemented because the U.S. has actually refused to allow the Security Council to act and to implement them. But in any case, that's one of the issues. And Trump said, "Huh, we were calling Israel genociders and not Hamas." That was the second thing. The third one was he said that South Africa had strengthened its ties with Iran. I don't know what they mean there because, uh, yes, we have bilateral relations. However, those bilateral relations are hugely constrained by the impact of the unilateral sanctions which the US has imposed on Iran. It makes it very, very difficult to deepen and develop a normal kind of bilateral economic relations. Um, and certainly there is no a cooperation in the area of nuclear technology. In fact, South African people in charge of our nuclear program have actually said as much that there's no cooperation with Iran. And by the way, South Africa's capacity at this stage, although there was during the apartheid days some nuclear weapons which have subsequently been uh, um, disposed of, and South Africa has renounced nuclear weapons. But the technology South Africa has now is isotopes for medical procedures and so on. But anyway, Trump said that because of those three reasons, he ordered a halt to all U.S. financial aid to South Africa, and he said that his officials must prioritize the settlement of white persons identifying as Afrikaners um, in the U.S. Refugee program. As of about 10 days ago, when I last looked, there were some reports that about 17,000 people have applied. Actually, what the far right wants to do in South Africa is not so much emigrate to the United States or anywhere else. What they want to use the leverage of right-wing governments like the US, like the Trump administration, to try to pressurize the state in South Africa to accommodate their quite exclusive and quite racist and very reactionary demands. So what does this mean? So let's just look at this. So the largest part of US financial support to South Africa, by far the largest amount, is under the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, which is called PEPFAR. And this program, what was supposed to be spent in 2025 was $439 million. And this is about 20% of South Africa's total AIDS funding. It goes to support the supply and provision of antiretroviral drugs and also a number of positions of people that work in this space. That program was when this order came out, along with the order about US aid in general. There were pictures on television and so on of people going for their ARVs, antiretrovirals, and being told that the clinic was closed, the staff were given a message not to come to work, and so on and so forth. There's subsequently been I would call it a stay of execution. Um, they've said that they would not implement that particular freeze until there was a review that was supposed to happen by the end of April. So it may or may not end up being cut. The remaining amount is $60 million. And this is on programs of climate change. Now, I don't think that this would survive on other grounds, a review by the administration. There's something in South Africa which we are actually quite critical of, which is called the uh, um, uh, uh, Just Energy Transition Investment Partnership, JET-IP, which was signed at the one of the COPs about 2 or 3 years ago, and most of it is loans, loans for climate change mitigation, for low carbon energy projects and things like that. And most of it is loans denominated in foreign currency, which we all have to pay back. And there's a very small part of it, less than 5%, which is supposed to be for social programs and retrainings and things like that. And I think that part is covered by that, and that I suppose is likely to disappear. Another part of it was programs of gender equality and gender-based violence, which I imagine also would disappear on out of any kind of aid program. And then the last one is something called promoting democracy, which is really a huge double-edged sword. And a lot of this has been used to fund NGOs, even political parties to the right of the ANC, and the media. In fact, there have been a number of stories about the media in South Africa that the embassy, U.S. embassy, invites the media to events which they call on the rocks and off the record, where selected media people are taken, have a conversation, and are encouraged to, you know, write, and many of them do, the U.S. message on this, that, and the other thing, including a lot of things about why are you bothering to go to the ICJ and this and this and this, all of those kind of things. Anyway, next slide, please. So this bullet at the top is slightly wrong. I mean, it's because of what Rubio said. He said that South Africa would not participate in the G20 summit. Sorry, the US would not participate in the G20 summit, which South Africa is chairing. But actually, I think what they're doing, because they've just had a meeting of the foreign ministers, and Rubio, of course, didn't go, and they send a junior official who reads out a statement, and I don't think they're going to agree to anything, even motherhood and apple pie. That, again, is probably more likely to be their response to any kind of, these either multilateral bodies or plurilateral bodies, which is what the G20 is, rather than directed at South Africa as such. They don't want to be, I mean, a meeting between the US, China, and Russia is not likely to agree on anything of any great substance at this point. And so I think and certainly they don't want to sit there and have the Europeans and all of that influencing outcomes, Canada and all of that. So I think that that was another part of it. They've also called for a broader review of relations between South Africa and the US. This was started by two Congress people, one Democrat, one Republican, that were sponsored by this lobby group in the US. I'm sure you know the name; it's escaped me at the moment. But the Zionist lobby group, which is the most powerful after the Rifle Association. Each of those were key members of that, and they called for a review of relations, and it was all because of the ICJ thing. I just want to point out that behind this is South Africa's potential exclusion from something called the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which is due for reauthorization. There was a chance it could have already been reauthorized before the election, but it didn't happen. So it's either going to be in March or September that it'll probably go before Congress if certain things happen for reauthorization. But the threat is that South Africa would be excluded from this. So let me just say quickly what is that. Next slide, please. Uh, Next slide, please. So what does AGOA do? It provides trade preferences that are not reciprocated. So what does that mean? It means that You get duty-free entry for certain lists of products into the United States, and you don't have to provide duty-free entry for products from the United States into your market. That's essentially what it is. Um, and the This thing started under the Clinton administration, has been renewed several times since then. Um, what it does actually, I mean, it says eligible African countries. It's not all African countries. It's sub-Saharan African countries for a start, and secondly, there's a number of them who are considered to have you might not believe it, but a gross domestic product per capita which is too high and are excluded. It's a country like Equatorial Guinea, which is excluded, but also the Seychelles and Mauritius, where we don't we're not excluded on those grounds because we have a huge poor population. Well, so do those places, but if you divide their wealth by the number of people they have, they get excluded. So and then there's about 800 tariff lines where the duties are removed, and another 3,400 that are removed under another thing called the General System of Preferences. Now, the eligibility criteria include you're supposed to be seen to be making progress towards a market economy, and there are political conditionalities. You're not supposed to be in opposition to US foreign policy. But actually, they've not used those criteria to exclude anybody up to now. And I think what's happening now is that it's been weaponized, and these kind of criteria will be used, and they will be used against South Africa. Next slide, please. So South Africa is actually the most prolific user of AGOA, and this is because really neoliberalism tells us that when you get a trade opening, then that sort of stimulates you, and you become a massive exporter of value-added products and so on. Of course, I think we know it doesn't happen. Your trade profile is a reflection of your productive capacity, and South Africa is more industrialized, although we're not industrialized and we are deindustrializing. But it is more industrialized than many other countries on the continent. But we only use 141 of the supposedly open 1,835 lines. And That's 8%, and of the GSP, 14%. Um, Exports going into the US under AGOA was about 60 billion South African rand. You could probably divide that by 18 at the moment. It was about 21% of South Africa's total exports to the US. What were they? Transport equipment, mostly motor vehicles, which the motor vehicles that are produced in South Africa by multinational corporations that find their way into the US, followed by agricultural products, fruit and wine, minerals and metals, chemicals, and then a small amount for items like clothing and textiles. So next slide, please. But as things stand, AGOA is really a nice to have, not an essential for South Africa. I mean, there's some value in keeping it, but it's not so essential because the duties on manufactured products in the US are not particularly high at the moment. For example, it's 2.5% on passenger vehicles. So if we had to pay 2.5% instead of zero, presumably, we'd still be able to get many vehicles into the US market. And apparel, clothing, we wouldn't, is 4%. So it wouldn't be prohibitive if we lost the AGOA preferences. But the administration on the 13th of February said that it was going to insist on country by country reciprocity. Whatever you charge to the US products, they're going to charge to you. We happen to charge what they now say they want to charge for everybody for motor vehicles, which is 25%. That would cut us out. And It would be, very much against the supposed idea that has been accepted by the US along with others that there should be less than full reciprocity. Smaller economies, weaker economies should not have to pay the same duty as the big, but this is giving way to demands of absolute reciprocity by the Trump administration. Next slide, please. And I think if that happens and that is carried through, that's going to mean actually it's not going to just be South Africa's participation in AGOA, but the whole AGOA program will be out the water, out the yeah, out. And I think you could see that some countries, like our neighbor Lesotho, which exports apparel to the United States under AGOA, it may well find that it loses this capacity, and along with that, jobs. So um, I think that we shouldn't give up the fight for AGOA. We should continue to lobby for it, and that is what's going to happen. That's what the government's doing. But I think it's also quite useful for progressive forces to add their influence as well. And I'm just suggesting here that it might also be something to think about a broader campaign, maybe remobilizing the old anti-apartheid movement against the hostile actions that have been directed at South Africa under something like the banner Hands Off South Africa. And I think, but comrades in the US, it's important to understand that the forces that are driving the campaign against South Africa are the very most reactionary forces in South Africa, who are, the heirs to the apartheid fundamentalists of the past, who've reinvented themselves as a lawfare and influence-seeking group, lobby group, who have the ear of Trump and Musk. And if they succeed and continue to succeed, it can only strengthen the hand of the most reactionary and racist forces in the US itself. So that's the end of what I wanted to say about South Africa. So the next slide, please. So I wanted to go into a few points about the bigger picture. So I think that the main thing that is driving a lot of what we are seeing is that over some considerable period of time, at least since the 2008 Great Recession, financial crisis, and Great Recession of capitalism, we have seen a transition, highly contested and hugely fought over, where the formerly uncontested global hegemon, the US, which emerged as the world's only superpower, so called, and so on, at the end of the Cold War when the Soviet Union disappeared from the face of the earth. This situation is now changing, and the world is transitioning to a world order that's going to be more multipolar. And I think that it's going to be a world in the immediate future with three global powers and several important regional powers. And the US is trying to navigate itself through that and try to maintain its dominance within a world order that is more multipolar. So, who are the other players, this global powers? Well, China. China has emerged through the skillful application of industrial policy. It's followed the route that every other industrialized country has followed, including the United States, and it has transformed its country into a manufacturing power of great substance, and not just a manufacturing power in general, but also a global leader in digital technology. So we're talking about the tech oligarchs. It is a competitor and a direct competitor. And this would have been plain to everybody a few weeks ago when DeepSeek, the Chinese AI tool, launched itself, and it created a massive hit to the tech stocks on the Nasdaq. So China is a competitor in that space. It's also a huge competitor in low carbon products, new energy vehicles, and things like that. So China has emerged as a peer competitor and probably likely to be the world's largest economy within a short space of time. That has changed the global picture dramatically. The other country that has emerged as a global power, has reasserted its position as a global power, is Russia. And it's done that because it essentially has prevailed against the imperialist proxy war in Ukraine. So Russia's prevailed, it's in the driving seat. There's nothing on the military front that imperialism, even with US present, and certainly without the U.S. present and supporting the Zelensky regime, the war is lost. And I think through that, Russia has emerged as a and its economy has not been battered by the sanctions. And so I think that we can see that there are now the at least the three world powers. Um, and I think that this is leading in the global north, in the developed world, but also particularly in the U.S., but not only in the U.S. It's leading to the recovery of industrial policy by those countries. So industrial policy used to be the thing that you did while you were trying to industrialize. Now you're facing competitive pressures from China and others, and so you're now trying to invest in industrial policy and support industrial policy, support your own against the competitor. So capitalism is now changing, and it's not only that. The next slide, please. It's not just that you're using the tools of industrial policy. There's also a deliberate and stated objective to contain and restrict China's advance in these important areas, particularly of digital technology. And this is defined not just as a matter of economic competition, but as a matter of national security. And so, what this is leading to is all of the neoliberal trade rules that were carefully crafted, foisted on the rest of the world by the World Trade Organization at the behest of the hegemon at the time, the US, and its allies in Europe and everywhere else. These are no longer being respected by the US. It began, I suppose, most dramatically with the first Trump administration, which started putting in national security justified tariffs against China and others. It was continued under the Biden administration, who added to it, and the now this Trump 2 is indicating that they're going to go even further. So they've been jettisoning the rules of the neoliberal order that they themselves crafted in the sort of early 2000s, the heyday of hyper-globalization and neoliberalism. And they have simultaneously, as they themselves are departing from this rule book, they have acted, for example, to ensure that cases in the World Trade Organization dispute mechanism against the US can't take place because they refuse to accept any appointments to the appellate body. So when a case goes to the World Trade Organization, the losing party just has to appeal. There's nobody to appeal to, so effectively the rule book is not enforceable. Next slide, please. But actually, this is having an effect which I think it's important for comrades to understand and support of countries in the global south, because while the throwing out of the rule book is being led by the US for its own reasons in competition with China, it's actually inadvertently allowed some countries in the global south to widen the policy space available for them for development. So the case that really stands out is Indonesia. Indonesia mines and produces nickel, and nickel is used in a whole range of digital products and so on. But Indonesia has decided that it does not want to simply be a producer and exporter of raw material nickel. It wants to add value to that nickel. And so it introduced a whole series of regulations requiring a certain amount of processing before that nickel is allowed to be exported. Now, the European Union objected to this. It went to the World Trade Organization. It won a case, and then the Indonesians appealed, and there's no one to appeal to. So the Indonesians are able to continue with what they're doing. And what has happened? They got $14 billion of investment in nickel smelting. There was double-digit economic growth in the nickel processing provinces of Indonesia, and a 30-fold increase in earnings from the export of nickel value chain products. Now, in my academic and other work, and in the advisory council, that's what I'm going to say. This is what Africa needs to do. We need to be turning around, and we need to be using a whole series of bold moves like this to actually support industrialization and development on the continent. Next slide, please. So now I'm just making a few, I'm trying, I'm outside the US, but trying to follow as closely as possible, including, things written by people in the US, what is happening, what is changing in US policy and in the whole line of imperialism. So I think there is a sense now that the US has found itself under the Biden administration, as it were, sidelined from the main focus that should happen in this changing global order, which should be to try to resist the decline in US hegemony and leadership in the world by a more decisive, what they call pivot to the East, a focus on an attempt to contain China, and also to thwart things like reducing dependence on the US dollar, de-dollarization, uh, and things that have been talked about within BRICS and all sorts of related initiatives. I think that this is what they see as the most important thing, and that they see that they've been diverted during the Biden administration from the by the imperialist war in Ukraine, which has now been lost. And I think that there's also some recognition that the old toolbox of U.S. imperialism that was developed, well, really, I think to some degree under the Obama administration, maybe the Bush administration, that what you do is you proclaim yourself to be the standard bearer of democratic liberal values across the world. There's only one order that can happen in the world. Everyone must become copycat liberal Democrats. And then you go to rather peripheral places in the global order. And you see that, well, actually, this regime is not following that. So what do? You put pressure on it, it doesn't work. So then you start to do things like fund color revolutions, as they're called now these days. You try U.S. aid will support different NGOs, will go out and try to organize, and you will try to bring down the regime. And then probably afterwards you have to put troops in. And then you then get involved in a long, running commitment. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, I think all of these, and then Ukraine. And I think what the Trump team is basically saying is that this is diverting us from our main focus, and that this model has to give way to another model. Now, it's not a model that's going to create a non-imperialist world. It doesn't mean the US has stopped being imperialist, but I think it's developing a new toolbox. I don't know exactly what's going to be in this new toolbox, but I think it's going to be less of that kind of stuff and more aggressive economic warfare. I don't think they're going to go into China and try to start a war with China based on Taiwan, for example. I think what they're going to do, they're even talking, by the way, the Trump administration, and we can't have a problem with this, surely, that they want a trilateral arrangement with Russia, China, and themselves to reduce the stockpile of nuclear weapons. So I don't think it's they want to go that way, but it's going to be much more aggressive economic warfare, sanctions, embargoes, kind of deals of one sort or another, throwing money around and that kind of stuff. And I think that that's probably what we should be getting used to. And we need to try to unpack that. And I'm sure comrades in the CPUSA have got a lot of better ideas about what this is going to be. I think we can see already there's a desire to exit the lost imperialist proxy war in Ukraine. I think if they don't get a settlement, very, very likely they're not going to give any more money to Zelensky. Zelensky's going to he's going to get defeated. But I think that along with that as well is there's a diminished interest in Europe, and there will be a decline in the role and significance of Europe and European capitalism in the global economy. I think that one of the things is that European capitalism never developed a strong tech sector. It doesn't have the tech oligarchs that we've been talking about, that the US has got, and the technology capacity that China's got, and even the technology capacity as a user and applier of equipment and software developed elsewhere by Russia. The Western Europe is not there. So they've tried to compensate for this by being the super climate conscious, um, green industrialization people, promoting net zeros and things like that. You've got a climate skeptic administration. I think it's going to Europe is in decline. I think that's going to be the reality. Probably what's going to happen is you're going to see a series of copycat administrations, Trump copycat administrations, emerging bit by bit in Europe. I think we might see um, uh, some change in the policy tools deployed in Palestine. I mean, already the Israeli regime, with the support and enablement of US imperialism and also its Western European allies, has bombed the place, the Gaza, to bits. I think we're going to see the objective of ethnic cleansing pursued, but probably with a greater application of some of these other tools that I've been mentioning earlier on. I think we're going to see something like, we already seen it, bend it put enormous pressure on Jordan and Egypt to accept Palestinians. I mean, it's like an existential issue for both of those regimes, because if they do it, they're going to get overthrown. But if they don't, they'll be put under enormous pressure. There will be an attempt to try to ethnically cleanse Gaza, and then present it, I think, as some sort of, not necessarily as a Jewish settler place, but maybe some kind of Abraham Accord, some sort of new Dubai with a lot of property development, things like that. I think that's where it's going, and it's probably an attempt to use a different toolbox. Whether they can, or whether they revert back to the old toolbox, I think remains to be seen. But I think there's some intention to try to build on a different a toolbox. The other thing that's happening is, with some grudging acceptance of a more multipolar, not multilateral, multipolar order, I think we've seen a strengthening of the hold in the Western Hemisphere. So even as some grudging recognition is given to Russia in its quote unquote sphere of influence, I think you can see there's an attempt to strengthen the sphere of influence in the Americas by the US. I try to work out, what is this beef with Panama? And the issue there appears to be that Chinese companies have won quite a few contracts for the upgrading of the canal, and I think some of the alternative projects of trying to create alternative routes across the isthmus, and I think that what is that's it, that's clearly it. This is the America backyard. America must be the ones that the United States must be the ones that lead there. And the actions against Mexico and Canada, I think they want to whip both of those into line as subordinates. Yeah, I think this thing about Greenland, well, I discovered, I didn't know that it actually goes back to the time of the beginning of the 20th century. But I think there's probably likely to be some sort of a prefigured a new Monroe Doctrine. Now, this is our sphere of influence. Everyone else keeps out. Um, I suspect we'll see further disengagement from multilateral bodies. When I was a trade minister, I used to go to the World Trade Organization, had to fight all these battles in the World Trade Organization. But the first Trump administration, it disengaged. Um, it would send a junior official to a meeting. This person would read out a statement and then have no authority to agree to anything. So nothing could be agreed, nothing could happen. And I suspect that that's what's going to happen now. Peter Navarro, who wrote the chapter in this Agenda 2025, whatever it's called, this thing on trade, he said that the US has got two enemies. One is China, the other one is the World Trade Organization. So I suspect we're going to see some of that. And then I think we're going to see the greater marginalization of Africa. I don't think that it's a serious priority for the Trump administration. It wasn't before. It wasn't for the Biden administration. By the way, the Biden administration, Biden made one state visit to Africa after the election when he was a lame duck. He went to Angola, and that was all about reinvigorating the Lobito corridor so that unprocessed cobalt, which is important in low carbon industries, could come more efficiently from the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, where there's a massive scramble for resources to through the Lobito corridor through Angola, and I think that was the extent of it. I don't suppose that Trump would be very interested in that, and probably we'll see a greater marginalization of Africa, which, as I was saying here, could be a blessing because I don't think we really want to see any of this kind of action. It's going to be hostile. It's going to be racist. It's going to be reactionary. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. I just wanted to say a few things about the restructuring of the U.S. state. This is where Elon Musk is coming in. And I'm saying, well, I'm sure we've got lots to learn from all of you, but I think that I'm going to put it like this: I think that tech oligarchic capital, in the name of Elon Musk, is driving a profound restructuring of the state apparatus of the U.S. It seems to me that there's a quite a number of aspects to this. I mean, obviously, one of them is to prevent what they call the deep state from blocking the Trump agenda. Um, but I think it's also got um, the tech oligarchies approach is to say they are in favor of what they call disruptive change, not incremental change. They want disruptive change, and they say that's the only way you get change is you come up. It's a massive new technological shift. Everyone's got to adapt to it. Everyone has to disrupt and change and so on and so forth. They think that's good. And I think that's what they're trying to lead in the US state apparatus, a much more profound restructuring. The other side of it is that uh, I suspect, there's no boundary between private accumulation and government service or anything like that. There's no boundary at all. I mean, I don't think Elon Musk has had to put any of his businesses in some kind of trust while he takes on this role as leading dog, or was it doggy? I don't know. Um, but nothing of that. So what are they going to try and do? I mean, I'm sure they're going to try to massively introduce artificial intelligence across a whole range of governmental processes. They're going to, I'm sure, seek profitable activities from doing that. And at the same time, access to government databases, which will have huge commercial value because most of this technology depends on gathering data and shaping algorithms according to data. So I think that this restructuring of the state, though, is not a neutral thing. It's likely going to involve tax cuts and cutting of programs that are important to the poor. It's certainly aimed at reducing the deficit and reducing the public debt. And I think that you're going to be seeing programs of cuts, cuts to programs that are going to be of importance to working class and the poor. Um, I think that there was a picture of Elon Musk with a chainsaw, and this is supposed to be him. And then a few people have said, well, actually, uh, this has already happened somewhere else a year earlier. And this is Javier Milei, the president who calls himself an anarcho-capitalist of Argentina. And he's already prefigured this. And he's sacked tens of thousands of government employees. He has cut all kinds of programs brutally and across the board of some kind of welfare or importance to poorer people in Argentina. He's got a bit of a bounce from markets and finance capital who like this kind of stuff. and so the economy's had a bit of a growth. But the inequality in Argentina has manifestly been widening. And I think that what this Doge thing and what Musk is leading, it seems to me that it's using the term efficiency, promote government efficiency. Who can be against more efficient government? It's actually using that term to drive austerity and also to drive opportunities for digital capital to accumulate through this kind of process. So I think that this is probably, seems to me, this is what Musk's role in the US is about. And it's a model that I think was actually started with Millet, but is likely to be, it'll be owned and promoted as Donald Trump's idea, but leave that aside. And I think in one shape, form, or another, is likely to be promoted in areas and countries where the US has influence as a model. And I think it could inaugurate a new phase where um, well, wages are depressed to the benefit of profit, where accumulation uh, advances on steroids, and where the tech oligarchy is leading also the interests of Wall Street, where I think the Secretary of the Treasury is a Wall Street person. And the other one, the other part of capital that I think is going to benefit is from the abandonment of all of the low carbon initiatives, exiting of the UNFCCC. It's going to be big oil. So I was throwing those ideas out, and I look forward to the discussion. So thanks, comrades.
Thanks, Rob. Hey everyone, this is Dom from Philadelphia. I'm going to be handling the Q&A and comments section. I'm going to start with a question from one of our panelists here, Dante, and then we'll go into what we have in the Q&A section in the chat. Dante asks, he's curious if there, and this is for you, Rob. He's curious if there is any link between the shock therapy that took place in Chile after the overthrow of Allende, and the collapse of the USSR to what Elon is attempting to apply to the United States now.
Are you going to take a few questions and then I
Yeah,
respond, or
I
yeah,
can take a
okay,
few. I'll do like three at a time. That sounds good.
okay.
Okay. I'm gonna go to the chat now. I'm just gonna go in order what we have. This one is from Michael Arney. He says, in the US, there is an infatuation with the rich by the general population, not from people attending events such as this, but certainly from the general population. Prior to Trump's reelection, I heard many folks praise Musk's entrepreneurial genius and the like. Is there similar gloating over the filthy rich in South Africa? Please expound. That's from Michael Arney, and I'll do one more, and then we'll let Comrade Rob answer. And this one's from Michael Madden. He says BNSF imports locomotive truck car body frames from RSA. What is known of this South African production facility? And those are the three we'll have, and then we'll go on from there. If you can take those right now, Rob.
Sorry, I didn't hear the name you said. Who just mention the company again?
This is BNSF imports locomotive truck car body frames from RSA.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I think we'll do those three, and then I'll move on to some others after that.
Okay. Well, thanks for those questions. Let me just take them all they came from. Uh, I would say the shock therapy that happened in Chile, the difference between that and what's happening now is that we've had the tech revolution. That's the difference. And that in Chile it was If we want to go back to Marx, this was uh, this was absolute surplus value. Just round up everyone, force everyone to close down all the unions, force everyone to just accept low wages and higher profits. Now I think we got a bit more relative surplus value. Introduce technology, raise the organic composition of capital, and in the name of efficiency and whatever, the effects on the working class and the poor will be a little bit less obvious, but nonetheless will be the same in the end. I think that's the only difference, and it's this idea, this notion that's around disruption. This is the mantra of tech oligarchs, that they are promoting disruptive changes. They make huge sums of money. You have winner takes all markets. This is another feature of this. That I read a book from some guys in MIT once, and they were saying that in the 19th century, only a few hundred people could ever see the best opera singer. So there was a market for the eighth best. Now, all of us can get the best app. So there's no market for the third best app. So there's super profits for the winner and nothing for the losers. And it's that kind of arrangement. So the super rich oligarchs emerge in that context. And I think that's the difference. And now we're going into this world of artificial intelligence. Then Michael's one. Um, I think it's probably not as extreme in South Africa. At least maybe I'm fooling myself. I mean, there is maybe it's more of a consumption idolization in South Africa. If you've got a nice car and you're in fashionable this and that and this and that, and you don't ask too many questions about where you got that from, because maybe you didn't get it through quote unquote entrepreneurship. You got it from some form of corruption. So I think that the infatuation with celebs is slightly different, maybe, but and I don't think that there's any. Well, there are a couple of individuals um, who are, not bad individuals in themselves, and try to do quite good things in themselves, but are still a big capitalist. I think of someone the name of Patrice Motsepe, who's a bit of a role model to some people, but I think the sort of infatuation you're talking about is slightly different. And then I don't know the specific companies, but I'm not surprised that we manufacture locomotive car bodies and export them to the US. I'm not surprised, because we actually are quite good at some of that kind of engineering. In fact, we're quite good at quite a lot of engineering, not even if it's autonomously South African. I mean, the watch I'm wearing was given to me many years ago because BMW, the South African BMW, won an award called the JD Power Award for the best export product into the United States, on-time delivery, least defects, all of that kind of stuff. So there is a capacity there. I don't know where all of these things are going to end up, because if there is going to be a more aggressive use of tariffs and those kind of things, I mean, before in the first Trump administration, they introduced tariffs on steel and aluminium products, and they didn't say this tariff applies to everyone who's exporting steel and aluminium. Now Trump is saying it will, but the first time around they didn't. And so their friends at that stage, Bolsonaro in Brazil, were exempted, and South Africa was subject to it. So I don't know where this is all going to go, whether these kinds of activities are going to be able to continue or not, or whether we're just going to be cut out. From our point of view, I mean, a lot of us have been saying we need to stop thinking in terms of dependence on exports to the developed world. It's not an easy ride. We need to be thinking about building the African continental free trade area into a tool of industrialization by building regional value chains and generating many more products that will initially be consumed on the continent and then maybe supplied elsewhere. The diversification of points of production. So I don't know what the future of some of these projects is likely to be. It could actually be affected by all of the politics that are emerging, and particularly the way in which South Africa has been singled out under the current Trump administration.
Thanks, Rob. I'm gonna jump around a little bit here. I'm gonna stick with three questions just so we can, to back and forth a little bit. Um, the first question I have is from John Case. He says, "What is the state of Russia relations with South Africa as well as other parts of the African continent?" That's one. I have another one from Susan. She says, "In government, clean food and drugs, safety in water and air, protection of consumers also affects not just working class people, but also society as a whole. Do you think this debacle could lead to them overstepping and causing a society-wide uprising?" And this next one here is from Elias. He says, "Do you think that the democratic victory over apartheid in South Africa has world historical significance for other countries in the midst of fighting fascism? If so, what lessons do you think are the most important to study as Marxists?" And those are the three we'll go with for this little stint.
Yeah, okay. So I think some of them are um, things that other comrades who are in the chat are going to know more than me about. But let me just say about Russia. Well, Russia's a partner in BRICS. Russia is we have bilateral relations with Russia. Not they're not as strong as our bilateral relations with say China, but they're there. We have uh, well, we refused to implement any of the sanctions which the Europeans and the Americans were unilaterally imposing on Russia as a result of the war in Ukraine. Um, and I think that that's where we are. There was an episode under the Biden administration. Um, there was a Russian ship that came into the Simonstown Naval Dockyard, and there were all sorts of threats that we were going to taken out of AGOA. That's always the way. Get taken out of AGOA, and that emerged at that time, and we rode this one through, and we continue to have relations with Russia, normal commercial and diplomatic relations with Russia. I don't think they've probably expanded very much because it does become quite difficult with these unilateral sanctions. None of our banks, we have a highly financialized economy like the US and like Britain. We're in that kind of league. And none of our banks want to touch deals and trades and things like that if there is a risk that they will be cut out of access to the US if they do that. Nobody's willing to do that, so it will be affected by that. But I think that our bilateral relations, have been normalized. The rest of the continent, Russia has played a very important role in this group of countries that are led by military governments, but relatively progressive military governments, starting with Burkina Faso, that have basically come into office. Burkina Faso, the president there, Traore, is a young captain, and he models himself on Thomas Sankara, and they have, and together with the military government in Niger, they have been, to use this phrase, beloved of the tech oligarchs, disrupted the relations, established neo-colonial relations with France, and particularly things like apparently one quarter of all the lights in Paris are powered by uranium that comes from Niger. But the price that Niger got for its uranium was a very, very small fraction of the world market price. Now they're changing those relations, and one of the supports they have received in all of this is coming from Russia. And so I think that Russia has increased its influence certainly in that part of the world, that group of countries that Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, that group of countries. So Russia is a significant player there. I think the point that was made about cutting all these important consumer protection and all that kind of stuff. And it's not just affecting the working class, it's also affecting many working class, many middle class people. I know the middle class term is not very precise in the US, but I think it is something of a risk, and I think that I don't know yet. I mean, at some point or other, uh, I mean, these measures are going to impact materially on the lives of ordinary people. I don't know enough about the what the IMF would call the riot threshold. Uh, how much of this do you do before people come out in the streets and riot? That's what they used to say. How much structural adjustment can we force on people before people come out and riot? I don't know what that is in the US and where that goes. Um, I think that there's going to be a lot of ethnic mobilization by the Trump people. And all his racist sort of stormtroopers and all of that. I don't know. I know where this is all going to go, but I think it is going to impose some material hardship on many ordinary people. I'm sure austerity does that. That's what it's about. It's about reducing the expenditure and obligations of the rich and capital, deregulating and all of that. And then what is the South? I think the South African case. Um, well, we ended up with a negotiated settlement. We didn't have an actual triumph of an unassailed triumph. And I mean, um, we are struggling in South Africa, and in the party we are pretty unhappy with the direction that some of the politics and some of the economic policies gone. I won't hide that. You may well know that we've got a coalition government in place now. The ANC in the last year's election, it did not have a majority. It lost its majority. It's got 40% in a proportional system, and it's in a coalition with it's the the successor to the party that Elon Musk's father was a candidate for. Liberal bourgeois opposition, which is completely and utterly committed to neoliberalism. So that's where we are. And so we've got huge problems of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Unemployment is through the roof. Economic transformation has not taken place. So I would want to say that I don't think we can just sort of hold ourselves up as a success story. And here's a model for the rest of the world to emulate. But and the struggle was a struggle that took place on there were four pillars of the struggle. It was a military action, it was mass mobilization, it was international solidarity, um, and I think there are things to be learned from that. But what I do think is that we are in a the changing global order, the impacts of neoliberalism, its aftermath, what's happening now. I think in my book, it puts a greater premium on struggles that we all link up with, the cross borders, that we're fighting for changes in the international order, because the international order as it's unfolding is not what we want. We don't want a sort of a great power deal. I mean, yes, if they get rid of nuclear weapons, a good thing, but it's not going to be a deal that's going to solve many problems of ordinary people. I think we must be demanding fundamental restructuring of a whole lot of the institutions that emerged after the Second World War, and some of them are now being cast aside. So I think that having an international dimension of the struggle is very, very important. So the South Africa case, well, there are things to learn. There are things to learn from many other cases, but also I think we need to also be conscious of the differences between then and now.
Thanks, Comrade Rob. I'm gonna take a couple more here. Again, like I said, I'm kind of just bouncing around. Um, this one is from Taryn. She says Elon Musk is a eugenicist who has 13 children. Is this related to his upbringing, and what influence do you think it has on his approach to restructuring the U.S. state? I have another one here from Joel. And let me know if I'm going too fast. Joel says, from your point of view, what is the relationship between the transformation of U.S. imperialism under Trump and the crisis of U.S. capitalism more generally, especially over the past 2 decades? Is this a reflection of generalized weakened condition of capital accumulation by U.S. centered capitalists? Sorry. And then the other one, this one is from Norman. He says China has been developing its model of socialism with market mechanisms under the leadership of the CPC, with the public sector controlling the commanding heights, in quotes or in brackets, finance. What does the SACP see about China's role as a socialist country globally, and especially its role in Africa? We'll go with those three.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Look, I was trying to say earlier that I think a lot of Elon Musk's current political positions and personality and so on was forged in his activities in the US. Um, and that I don't know whether we can read too much into his upbringing in South Africa. What I kind of know from a little bit I've read about this is that he didn't have a happy childhood. He was bullied at school, and I don't think he's got really, really fond feelings for his background in South Africa. Um, he he has wanted to come into South Africa as a business person. He wanted to bring in his Teslas, but he wanted to have them come in duty free, where every other car manufacturer has to pay duties and then get duty exemptions if they manufacture in South Africa. He didn't want to go that route, and he doesn't want his Starlink. He wants to bring it in, but he doesn't want his Starlink to have to conform to any of the what would you call them, corporate social responsibility, black empowerment requirements that players in that space have to have. And I think that's informing quite a bit of his uh, arguments about racism in South Africa, reverse racism, which is what people like him call measures of affirmative action and stuff like that. Now, I think that his background as someone in apartheid South Africa. Well, I was also grew up in apartheid South Africa, probably a bit earlier than him. Uh, and I didn't enjoy my school and childhood, and it turned me into a rebel. It didn't turn him into a rebel. It turned him into something else. And yes, he is exactly what you say. I mean, he's got these eugenics views, which are the kind of ideology that was much associated with fascism, and I don't know exactly where he developed those particular views. I'm not sure at all. Comrade Joel, I mean, I think I was trying to say, or that was quite quick, exactly that the crisis of U.S. capitalism from the time of the global financial crisis, the US underwent extensive financialization. The financial sector grew. It hollowed out the manufacturing capacity of the US. They argued it didn't matter because US corporations could still be at the head of value chains, and finance was the name of the game. But finance was increasingly preying on productive capital. It wasn't just providing services to productive capital. It was also taking surplus value from productive capital for much more rapid accumulation in the financial sector. And I think that this meant that ultimately China, which to just come to the other question, yes, the Chinese Communist Party has followed a very, very skillful program of industrial policy, state-led industrial policy, which is where the SACP we want to go. We want to go for South Africa, uh, and I mean what it has done is it's they've disciplined their financial sector. Their financial sector was never allowed to become traders in paper. They were obliged to be providers of finance to support industrial development. Their state-owned companies led the process. Yes, they privatized a number of the ones that they didn't think were worthwhile, but they retained the strategic leadership. They liberalized the Chinese economy very, very slowly, and only in certain places to start with. And actually they've done remarkably well. I mean, it is the most dramatic transformation. It's sometimes said that hyperglobalization and neoliberalism uh, led to hundreds of millions of people exiting poverty. Most of those people were in China, and they did it with policies very different from the conventional neoliberalism. So I think that all of that has created a crisis for U.S. capitalism. U.S. capitalism has one leading position, and that was in the tech oligarchy, and it's getting outcompeted there too. So I mean, Huawei had leadership in the rollout of 5G networks, and then they stopped them coming in, and then leaned on the Europeans to follow suit. That's the kind of story you've had, and it's because the has been U.S. capitalism has been losing out that it's now taking these steps of introducing some kind of industrial policy in America itself, but also trying to act to contain China, refuse to allow China in, and so on. I think that's the model, and that's it's because of that's happening. And I think that Trump and them see that they've got to play in that space more decisively, and that these Ukraine wars and the color revolutions in Libya and all that are a distraction. And Afghanistan and all that. So I think that's what's happening, and I think they're trying to structure the U.S. state to give effect to that and restructure imperialism to allow them to become more effective players in that kind of agenda. I think that's what's happening. And then uh, relations with China. China is, I think that we want to say is South Africa, Africa. You know, um, we everyone's got their own interests. China's got its own interests. If you don't assert your interests, China will, if they invest in your country, they'll bring the whole workforce. But if you tell China that these are the rules of the game, this is how you invest, they will come in and they'll follow the rules of the game and they'll be effective. I'm going to give another example, a South African example. When I was in government, there's a company called Hisense, Chinese company. They make domestic appliances, things like that, and they have a factory. And I went to them once, and they said that this was the best performing factory outside of China. And then I said, well, where are the others? The US was in the list. They have a factory in the US somewhere. They said, no, our factory was doing better than theirs. And I went back a few years later, and I said, is that still the case? They said, no, you can leave out the outside of China. They say you're as good as anything in China. So if you work with them, you can. And the other thing is, if they promise to do something, they do it. They don't renege afterwards. So there are some things about China that are of real benefit, but of course you have to hold your own corner as well.
Thank you. I think for the sake of time, we'll just do one more question, and then we'll go to the closing. So this one is from Luke. He says, "You've highlighted the salience of digital capital, which has, of course, proliferated at a global scale and restructured the political economy and human geography in the global north and south alike. How would you describe these developments as they've taken place in South Africa? What shifts can be observed in the composition or political character of the South African working class?
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, indeed. So I think that first of all, like Europe, I suppose, we are users of technologies that are produced elsewhere. We're not producers of these technologies. We are users of them, and they have massively reshaped the lives of people across the African continent as much as anywhere else. I mean, I think it's this kind of double-edged sword thing. We would not be having this webinar in this way. We wouldn't be able to talk to you if we didn't have this technology. So it's a benefit. Lots and lots of people have access to cell phones and smartphones for that matter across the continent, and there have been adaptations that have benefited. On the other hand, we are providers of huge amounts of data which is accumulated and benefiting the operators of that tech through improvement of the algorithms and massaging our taste, changing our patterns of consumption and things like that. They've had already disruptive effects on many industries, on things like online e-commerce is you have and then the downsides for the working class is if you're talking about workers in shops now you've got if workers in physical shops there are probably less and less jobs for workers in physical shops. There are jobs for people who are motorcycle delivery. Operates on a model where if you don't deliver a certain number of motorcycle, it's like Uber. If you don't do enough journeys, you don't make any money. So you have to drive like hell and all of that, and it's dangerous and it's not desirable. And I think that there's a lot of that that's happening. We are being told, and I mean I don't know how up to speed many of our officials are about some of these things, but we are being told there's tons and tons of investment you can get as long as you have no regulation, no data sovereignty asserted, things like that. So I think it's had a huge effect on us as it is everywhere in the world. I mean, I think as we move into this era of artificial intelligence, what seems likely from the things I've been reading is that we're not just going to face a situation where the unskilled are going to be replaced by a computerized process. I mean, one of the things when I was in government, I used to go to factories and they would tell me that uh, we've taken out the human error in quality control. And what do they mean by that? They meant that they used to have a bunch of workers on the production line. They would be taking out the rejects, the substandard products, and some would get through. Now they have a computer on top which identifies it, and the workers have lost their job. So it's a fairly lowish skilled job. Now we're going to find higher skilled jobs are going to start being at risk from artificial intelligence, legal researchers, medical personnel, any kind of research at all, and all of that. So I think we're in this contradiction. I mean, many of us in the South African Politburo, we've been reading a book by, it's called The Tech Coup. It's by a European person who now is in I'm going to say Princeton, but I'm not sure. One of the universities in the US, and I think her name is Markie or something like that. It's a Dutch name, and I think that I mean it's a very she's a European style liberal Democrat, but there's a lot of information there. And I think it's pointing to this contradiction. Here's a technology that has the capacity to change human life, to enable us to move to what Marx talked about, that we would be in the morning we're out in the fields, in the afternoon we're writing a book, and in the evening we're doing that kind of life. It has that capacity. It has the capacity to solve a whole lot of problems. It has the capacity to improve human life, reduce drudge labor, but it's in the hands of people who are seeking profit and also seeking to deregulate in the interest of their own profit seeking. And I think it's that contradiction that we have. But I would just say one other thing about South Africa is the other thing that's happened in South Africa is we've financialized. Um, I mean, it's much more than this, but in 1994, financial services were 6% of the GDP of South Africa. Now they're something like 25%. In the 1990s, the biggest and richest people in South Africa were the mining houses and people like that. Now it's the wealth managers, the fund managers. What do you call them in the US? I know there was a term, but it's those kind of people. So we've had financialization, the introduction of tech, and I think that those are some of the realities, and they apply across the continent.
Thank you, Rob.
Yes, thank you, Rob. Uh, I just want to say it's been great to hear your perspective on what's going on in South Africa and the US. I think these are two sides of a really quickly developing situation globally, uh, as we see the United States taking one turn and several other countries, including South Africa, taking another, trying to steer towards a more balanced world. So we thank you for your perspective, and like you noted, for us, um, we'll try to offer a perspective that is well informed, based on the party's experience and people who aren't in the party here, for people who are coming from the various social and political movements, uh, for justice, for progress. And so, again, we'd like to thank all the attendees. Rob, I don't know if you have any final remarks you'd like to leave us with.
No, I would just say I'm very happy that the with the engagement. I'm very happy with the opportunity. I think I personally, I don't know. I mean, I know how our comrades, other comrades from South Africa participated in this, but I'm sure we would be interested to hear exactly what you say. Is a perspective from yourselves about these issues. So I'm grateful and happy that we had this chance. Thanks very much. Mhm.
All right. As our co-chair says at the end of Good Morning Revolution, our weekly broadcast, we ask everyone to stay strong, stay safe, and stay in the fight. See you all around.
Yeah.